On this episode, we really get some insight on who David Perel really is. Good evening, everybody. This is Abdul Sayed, Motor Talk with Witzenberg, episode number 8, coming to you from Cape Town, the beautiful mother city. And I have an absolutely awesome guest, and maybe guests on the show tonight. This young man hails from, well, Blancpain in Cape Town, right next to Killarney, currently talking to us from London, the UK. And he's got an absolutely awesome story to share with us tonight. And hope you guys have all ears on. And on the show with me tonight, we also have my co-host, Byron Height. And hi, Byron.
Hey, howdy, Abdul. How are you doing?
I'm really good. I haven't seen you for 3 days since the last Gymkhana.
It's been too long, Abdul. You know, it's amazing. You know, we're on show number 8 already, hey?
Absolutely.
And, you know, I can't believe it. It's actually amazing how we've grown already in this short little space of time, only 8 weeks old. And, yeah, you know, coming now 3 days ago, as you're saying, the Gymkhana, well, you call it a season, really, of events that we've had has come to an end. Sadly, of course, a lot of our months were taken away from us because of COVID, and I think we've come off a very good few events, I'll tell you that. Unfortunately, a few withdrawals that came into the weekend. The Smits, Andre and Anton Smit, couldn't unfortunately make it. I missed them a heck of a lot as well. There were a number of other names throughout the time that throughout the weekend they couldn't unfortunately make it. Some of the new names came along though, like Chet Meyer and a few others as well. We also had some newcomers, as we always do every time at Gymkhanas, Abdul, which I like actually a lot, is that we get newcomers at every race meeting. You know, people from various different backgrounds, various different types of motor car. So I think what happens is we started so strongly this year, and I think hopefully 2021 is going to pick it up even more.
Absolutely, Baden. Absolutely. Okay, so Carl in the background there, thanks to Carl for organizing all the hardware and the software and whatever you do to make this happen. Thank you so much. And I just want to introduce you to one of our very special guests, David Perel. Welcome to you, David, on the show from the UK, all the way from the UK.
Abdul, thank you so much for having me on.
It's an absolute pleasure. You know, a man of such a stature, such a humble person. And that's one of the reasons why you are so successful in what you do. You know, David, tonight the show is going to be predominantly about you. And obviously, I believe Patrick is in the background there as well, Patrick Vermaak. Patrick is like the Google of motorsport. You know, he knows the answer to every question, every rally, every Gymkhana. He knows the date, the time, the place. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable what he has in his mind, in his brain. He probably has a normal brain, and he has got another motorsport brain as well, I suppose. So, David, before we get into your story, hi, Patrick.
Good evening, Abdul. Good evening, David.
Hi, Patrick. How are you doing?
And Byron.
Long time.
Yeah, it is indeed, and it's great to have you on air finally. We have been looking forward to chatting to you again for quite some time. In the meantime, you've almost won a few world championships, so fantastic to see you progressing.
Thank you. It's been a journey since we last spoke. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, David, Patrick, you're going to be talking to us about what's happened at Killarney on Saturday. That's predominantly what you're going to talk about. But I want to start with David first, just maybe get a little bit of insight. I'm not going to give anybody any more information because that's what you're going to do tonight, David. I want you to take us back when you started here in Cape Town, in Blancpain, and what motivated you to end up where you are currently.
Sure. So first of all, hello everyone. Thanks for watching this evening, or if you're watching this later, as is technology these days. So I grew up always wanting to be a racing driver. It started because I saw a photo of my dad in a Formula Ford, but way back in the day. He went to the UK to try become a racing driver for 1 or 2 years, didn't enjoy it, and sort of forgot about it, and came back to South Africa, started a family, started a business, started a family, But he had some of these photos which I have stumbled upon when I was very young. It's one of my first memories is not actually seeing the photo, but remembering the feeling of like, is this my dad in a racing car? So that blew my mind. And also I loved racing. I loved helmets a lot. I still do. I'm obsessed with helmets. So I wanted to wear helmets all the time around the house. My mum would freak out because my neck of me and my brother, we couldn't hold my dad's motorbike helmet on our head, but we insisted. But my parents they weren't interested in getting us into racing in any shape or form. I didn't know karting even existed until much later in life, till I was about 11 or 12, when I met Steven Simpson, who happened to live in the same area as me in Hout Bay. And eventually, when we were 14, I convinced my parents to get me a kart. It was through a friend of ours called Claude. Claude introduced me to karting, and with the help of him, convinced my dad to get us a second-hand kart. A kart and engine, I think, cost 5,000 Rand. But my dad was super reluctant, and he said, look, when you turn 18, that's it. I'm not supporting your racing for much longer. When you turn 18, it's going to be all on you. So my brother and I started karting a year ahead of him. We only raced in the Western Province Championships, occasionally did some national stuff, and eventually progressed to the point where I managed to qualify for the World Finals, the Rotax Max World Finals, around the age of 23. And I finished sixth. I think there was maybe a chance I could have won. I was fighting for the lead, but I threw it away. In my opinion, at least, I threw it away. So I finished sixth in that. But from the age of 18, my dad stuck to his word. He stopped helping us with racing. And my brother and I were trying to find our own way to pay for our karting and stuff. So we started like our own little business together, which I'll get into in a second. And I used my salary from that, which was tiny. We were just making websites for the shop down the road, if you will. I was using that money to go karting. And another person at the racetrack, Claudio Piazzamuso, you guys may have heard of him, legend. He would help me, find an engine or help me rebuild an engine from different parts. Not me physically doing the engine stuff, but like if I had 500 Rand or 1,000 Rand, he'd find a way to help me make that happen. So anyway, by the time I'd reached the World Finals, I was already beyond the limit of having any money left, and effectively ran out of money around that time. I tried to get into big circuit racing, but it only lasted 3 races. I was racing with Lee Phillips in Formula Volkswagen. At the time, I was racing for free. Lee was kind enough to let me in the car, but it didn't last. So I stopped. I stopped completely and left racing. I wouldn't come to the racetrack or anything like that, not because I was bitter. I just had learned to accept that you can't go far without money. It's just not going to happen. Doesn't matter how good you are. And just by the way, when I was racing karts, I wasn't one of the best. I did well at the World Finals, but it took me a very long time. And I was racing against a lot of world champions who came from South Africa. And it was very often that I couldn't match up to their results or abilities and stuff. So just keep that in mind. It wasn't just about being a fast racing driver. So I went away and I said to my brother, I promise you that the same dedication that I put into our business, that I put into my karting, I'm going to put into our business. So I moved into the office that we were working from. We had a red couch that was in front of my desk. That's where I slept most of the time. And for the next 7 years, my brother and I worked flat out, really did. And my brother would sometimes come wake me up in the office because there was a little cottage that I could sleep in as well. But he'd come nudge me awake, keep working, go back to sleep there, etc. And we built, it wasn't a phenomenally successful business, but it was enough that we could earn a living. But at the same time, I was saving some of that money to try and come back to racing at some point in the future. I didn't know when that was going to be. I just knew that every morning I woke up, I would look at the ceiling and I'd think to myself, how is it possible that I'm not a racing driver? My dream was always to become a professional racing driver, not Formula One or anything. I wanted to become a professional, which means you're paid to race. Someone gives you money to go racing. But obviously to get to that point, you have to pay yourself. You have to pay to become paid. The return on investment, it doesn't exist. There's no return on this investment. But I just wanted that accolade of being a paid professional. So around the age of 29, I don't have a family, I don't have a wife or anything like that. I decided, with the help of my brother, convincing me to give racing one more shot, but doing it properly. And I figured, I was watching Le Mans that year. Well, I watch Le Mans every year, but I was watching it around the time of Le Mans. I was just watching the race, and I saw someone standing in the pit lane with his helmet on, and the race car was coming in, and he was going to do a driver swap, and he was going to get in, go racing. And I figured, imagine what that must feel like. It must be the most amazing feeling to be at Le Mans at night, ready for a night stint. Now, keep in mind, I've only done 3 circuit races at that point, very short formula races, no experience at all in GT cars or anything. But literally the very next day, on the Monday after Le Mans, I found the entry list of the race, of all the teams, Googled all of their names to find their contact details, and progressively or slowly started to cold call or cold email every single one on the list. And it was literally every single team either didn't answer or just said no. It was the final name on the list, Ram Racing, who was willing to take my call and give me some guidance. And I'll never forget that call, because I figured that you would need about, to race in Le Mans, I don't know, 20,000 euros, which is at the time was like, let's just round it up to about 400,000 Rand. Not cheap by any means, but I figured that's what you kind of needed. 300 to 400,000 Rand. And I was like, with my savings, and maybe if I can convince some people, I can maybe try do Le Mans. Again, no experience to race on a big track. So completely naive, completely wrong. I then later discovered that I needed more like 6 million Rand to race in Le Mans.
And how old were you then?
29 and a half.
29.
So from the age of 23 to 29 and a half, I'd been saving money to try come back to racing. So even though I'd put it aside and no one saw me at a racetrack, no one knew who David Perel was, I had a very clear idea that I was going to come back and give it one more proper shot. So I'd saved about 15,000 euros. Okay, so if you take off the travel, you have about 13-ish left to go racing. And I'd just been told that I needed 300,000 euros to race at Le Mans. And by the way, they don't just let you in at Le Mans, the teams. You need experience. And to gain experience, you need about another 600,000 to race in different championships over 2 years. So it was insurmountable. It was impossible. So I figured, you know what? I'll just try to do one race in a GT car. So with the help of Claudio, we got in touch with a guy called Alan McDonald, and he got me into a team, into a race for the exact amount of money I had, which I'll tell you why that's significant in a second. The exact amount of money I had, coincidence, I managed to get into this race, the Italian GT in a Lamborghini GT car. And I remember at Imola. So that was one of the things on my list. I said to Alan, look, I only have enough money for like maybe one race. Can we try it, find an opportunity at Imola, Monza, or Spa, legendary racetrack in either a Lamborghini, a Ferrari, or a McLaren GT car? And Alan said, yeah, it's not going to happen, but he eventually found the way. He found a team. And I arrived, had already spent all the money that I had, and realized that you needed, on top of all that money, you needed a 2,000 euro helmet, carbon helmet. My regular one didn't qualify. So I ended up using the team manager's helmet, which to me is actually very bad luck. But the race went very well. And the guy who was engineering the car, his name's Gianfranco. Coincidentally, he came in as a freelancer for this particular weekend. I was fighting for the podium. The only time I'd seen Imola was in a video game, which I'm big on, by the way. I'm big on simulators. And it felt natural. Everything came to me as if I hadn't been away for 7 years. But I was done, because I knew, and I was totally fine with the fact that in order to progress, I needed more money, of which I had none. I'd already spent that 7 years savings, which should have been, let's be honest, the deposits on a house if I was going to be a responsible human being, of which I'm not. So Gianfranco said, look, what are you going to do now after the race? He said, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to go back to my life and continue with my business. And he's like, well, you have a lot of talent and you have the potential to become a professional. And I was like, yeah, sure, I've heard that many times in my life. He's like, if there's any other opportunities, I'll give you a call. And I looked at Alan and I said, I have heard that one too as well. And a month later, I was chilling in South Africa. Gianfranco calls. Well, actually, Alan calls. Gianfranco called Alan. Alan called me. David, you need to get on a plane to go race in Malaysia for the Lamborghini Super Trofeo World Finals. You'll be the amateur in the car of a Pro-Am, in the Pro-Am category.
Yeah.
Your teammate's going to be an ex-Formula 1 test driver, Mirko Bortolotti, and yeah, go. Okay, so anyway, I went to that race. I had brake failure while leading. The pedal went to the floor, broke my leg. The team said to me very clearly, the team said, you will never race again. You don't have what it takes, because they thought it was my fault. But anyway, I didn't give up. And the following year, that same team called us and said, do you want to race with us in the full season of Italian GT? And that's when things started to really kick off. So I started to find a lot of money, 100,000 euros I had to find from thin air, and I managed to find ways. And in that season, my first full season of GT racing, I got more pole positions than anyone else, more wins than anyone else, more podiums, but we finished second because I also had more retirements than anyone else from punctures. No crashes, because if you're paying your way, you have to pay for those accidents. Keep that in mind. So you got to race at some kind of limit, but just under it, because if you crash that car, it's a level of money that we simply cannot afford as South Africans. That current currency just will destroy us.
So quick question. Nobody, well, you were not sponsored by anybody from South Africa. I mean,
No.
none of the controlling bodies.
No.
Nothing. It was,
An American
all
helped
your
me.
own doing.
American helped me in the next season. That season I was hustling. Sold my car, sold everything I had, sold a share in my company, which is incredibly reckless, but took the risk.
David,
Yeah.
2 questions, please. Based on what you just said there, you said the company or the team that you were racing with said you'll never race again, yet they invited you back to do a full season. How did they prove your innocence with a brake failure?
Well, there was GoPro footage, which they initially refused to watch. I had it. I still have it on my phone. And you can see my foot just go straight to the floor, and then I used both my feet to try and stop the car. And in there, they just refused to watch it, which was the most bizarre thing. It was bizarre. And eventually they ended up watching it at Lamborghini as well. Lamborghini also watched it. And they just had to change their heart, because up to that point, I was doing very well. I was quick. I wasn't on the pace of the pros yet by any means, but I was very competitive. And due to the way that the FIA rankings work, I was an attractive driver to the team. They needed an amateur ranked driver, of which I was, but I had the pace of maybe a semi-pro at that point. So if you can have an amateur driver in the car who's driving as quick as the pros, you get a better deal, so to speak. So that's why they called me. I was probably not their first option, to be honest, but I became an option. And that was with Benaldi Racing. And it was a great season. I raced in Italy, but it was incredibly stressful, because between each race, I had to come home and find 15,000 euros for the next one. And eventually I stopped finding money. I just couldn't. And the team stretched things out. And then I convinced my family to help me a little bit for one of the races, and I had a crowdfunding campaign, and it was so stressful. From the money that I had made from selling a share in my company, I'd managed to pay for the first 3 races. So I've signed a contract of 105,000 euros that I had to pay. I signed it knowing that I only had about 25% of the budget. So I took a lot of risks. I took a huge amount of risks.
but you pulled it through on pure talent. We can only compliment you on that. And I can vouch for the fact that your budget was stretched, because I had the honor of having you attend our prize givings, literally arriving there with worn through shoes. And I'm not saying this to embarrass you. I'm saying
No,
this.
I'm not shy of that.
I'm saying this to actually, with admiration, I'm saying that because I really feel you put everything on the line.
Yeah, it wasn't just that. Eventually in 2000, so after that year, where I finished second in Italian GT, well, what next? I thought that maybe the team could offer me something for less money, and I'd just keep finding more money. But that's when I got introduced through Alan again to Kessel Racing, which is a Ferrari team. They're still on my helmet there because I still race for them. I'm now their factory driver. So Ferrari-backed team in GT3s, the top level, Blancpain GT. So straight from Italian GT, like the subclass, to the top level of GT racing, which was like a year quicker than what I was thinking. But I still needed to find more money, and I signed that contract as well with nothing. And that's when this American guy came in to help me. He helped me for a couple of races, but the season itself was terrible. This is 2016. And I had to stop halfway because my teammates didn't like each other. It was a total disaster. I came back to South Africa thinking, okay, I did try. It was pretty intense and very stressful. Obviously, I wanted to continue. It's not continuing, but okay, back to work. And then towards the end of the year, Kessel gave me a call because one of those two teammates that I was sharing the car with wanted me again as an amateur ranked driver to be with him in another series. And that's when things started to kick off again. 2017 was where I really gained momentum. So in 2017, I moved to England. I arrived here with a tiny little bag because I still had no money. And that year, I won the Blancpain Championship in my class. I won the Sprint Endurance and the overall championship and the Spa 24 Hours. And that was kind of a breakthrough year.
You make that sound very, very simple. You're so humble in saying that. But winning at Spa, taking the Blancpain Championship, that's huge in motorsport.
Yeah, I am very proud of them. But I'm still competitive. I look at the guys who've won the pro category, and I want to be like them. I don't want to be the guy who won the AM or the pro am. I've achieved some things in my career which I'm very proud of. For a long time, I held the record at Spa, the lap record for a GT3 car. I've won the 24 Hours of Spa twice. I've been on pole position at Suzuka overall against pro drivers. Well, okay, I'm a pro now, but at the time I wasn't. Yeah, and I mean the story continues. This year for the first time I drove at Le Mans, not in the race, but in the support race, and I broke the race lap record, which is cool. So I'm very proud of what I've done, but it's not even close to the drivers that I've met and the things that they've achieved. Humbles me because I haven't achieved even 1% of what some of these guys have.
But David, if you look at your journey, I mean, that's just a story in itself. I think you should write a book.
I'm most proud of my journey.
Yes, absolutely, because that is what makes.
I'm of this big trophy or anything like that. In 2017, I was still paying, and 2018, I made the crossover to becoming a pro. So that team, Rinaldi Racing, that one, they offered me a seat for free, and that was the first half of the year was for free, and then the second half they started to pay me, and that was all I ever wanted. It still wasn't an easy year. There's been times in my life where I haven't had money for lunch or breakfast or dinner. That's legitimate. Stuck in England, so it's been quite tough. But I know now that is what I'm most proud of, is that I found a way. And if you look compared to my competitors, for them to become pro, they had to find the full budgets and They had to find a way to make this all happen with a massive wallet. I just had to be a nice guy, I suppose. And
David, the man I got to know has one vision in his life, and that is to sit on that starting grid at Le Mans.
yeah,
You've been there, you've done a race, I don't want to say it, you came second on a countdown in a championship, which
Yeah.
makes you a winner in my book. But you
I've
still,
got a
you're still
PhD in
missing,
finishing second.
no, you're just missing one link. What is the prospects? Is there something on the horizon for a genuine Le Mans start?
Okay, so this year I took part in 2 series. I took part in the European Le Mans Series and the Michelin Le Mans Cup. It's confusing naming structure, okay? But anyway, if you win either or finish second in either, you win a free ticket to Le Mans. A team cannot just buy their place on the grid at Le Mans. You have to be invited, and there's certain criteria to do that. One of them is to finish in the top 2 in the European Le Mans Series. And this year I finished tied for the win for the championship. I tied on wins, pole positions. We tied on 3rd places. We tied on 4th places.
Incredible.
Amazing.
And the only reason we were classified as second is because they won the first race. So nevertheless, we still have an entry to Le Mans next year with Kessel. So I've earned my place on the grid now, literally. It's now a question of if Kessel can find the budget to put us on the grid. But that to me is that's it. I mean, even this year, I was in the support race in the Michelin Le Mans Cup. It's a support race for Le Mans itself. We do 2 races on the weekend, 1 hour each. And it's around the full track, and you're in a GT3 car. And they go just as fast as the GT cars in Le Mans. And I couldn't believe it. When I walked onto the racetrack for a track walk, I was incredibly emotional because the journey to get to that point, the amount of times during this 5 or 6 year stretch where I thought it was over, or that I can't keep going, I can't keep pushing, I just can't keep enduring the pain that is part of trying to become a pro. And I finally got onto that track was amazing.
Absolutely.
I finished in the first race, I finished 3rd. The second race, I caught the leader into the last corner. We crossed the line within 2/10 of each other. So I stood on the podium at Le Mans. I have the 2 trophies up here. And while I was standing in the podium waiting area, right next to me were the massive Le Mans trophies. And then sitting next to them was Anthony Davidson and Nicolas Manassier, who've both done 1 million Le Mans, having a chat. And I couldn't believe that this was my reality when in 2014, I was just sitting at home so far away from the connection of motorsports, just in the Western Cape, let alone all the way going through, trying to find my way to Europe, trying to earn a salary so that I could keep doing this thing. And now I was standing in the podium room next to 2 legends of Le Mans, about to walk onto the Le Mans podium. That is a dream come true. It's ridiculous.
Absolutely. But you had a vision. You had a vision, and you visualized what you wanted from a very young age already. And if I can just say for the youngsters out there today, if they really, regardless whether it's motorsport or any other sport or anything else in life, if you really want something so badly, you got to be prepared to give up what
Everything
you love.
else.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to have to have complete focus for a short period of time to achieve what you want, but you got to stick in there.
Yeah. No, you have to be. I mean, the toughest thing was leaving South Africa because my brother and I are like twins. We are a year apart. He's younger than me, but we grew up together, went to school together, started a business together. And then I moved away from my brother, which was very tough, and my friends. And I still live in London on my own. It's very difficult to make friends in London or in a foreign country when I'm always traveling. So my friends are the racing team, but and I had a girlfriend here, which was a long-term girlfriend. She decided to stay. I left, and that was it.
Yeah.
Selling a share in my company, which I'd been building for 10 years, just so I could try again to go racing. Huge risk. But these are the things you have to be willing to do. When I get an email about someone who wants to become a racing driver or wants to be like me, and they tell me how good they are, they tell me what they did in karting, I'm like, yeah, cool. But are you willing to do these other things
Yeah.
that I've had to endure? Because I know a lot of drivers like me on the grid who have people who've come from Australia, especially, really tough, really, really tough as well. It's far away from the motherland of motorsports, you know?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of wealthy kids. Let's just use Australia as an example because their currency is a bit stronger. For them, it's a bit easier to afford the extreme costs of becoming a racing driver in Europe. And only one of two or three of them make it because it's not even just about the money, which is incredibly important. It's about the sacrifices and those who are willing to endure the loneliness, the struggle, the rejections, losing races, crashing a car when you shouldn't have. Those things are what will eventually, if you can tick all those boxes and recover from those slips, that is what will eventually define you as a racing driver, professional. Not how fast you are. I can name for you this weekend alone in all the categories, in all of motorsports and all of sim racing, pole positions and winners, of which there are thousands of each. And they all think that they're Ayrton Senna because they got pole this weekend. Means nothing.
Yeah. Biden, you had something
David?
to ask David?
I think, and just going on that point, David, because we were talking just before the show, and I remember Claudia Piazzamuso when we spoke to him a few years ago on another show, that you say it's not enough just to be a fast racing driver. That was the old mentality. Be a fast racing driver and you'll make it. But we've seen now, even in classes like Formula One, look at Red Bull, for example. They're not just going for fast guys. They're going for guys with a certain character and personality and everything. And I know a guy like a Daniel Kvyat, for example, who's part of that, he struggles with that side of it because he believes, I think, in being just a plain fast racing driver. So tell us more about the whole promoting yourself aspect of racing, like you were talking about.
Yeah, sure. So, okay, let's go back to this whole thing of like, if I'm fast, they will choose me to be their racing driver. Okay. The first thing you have to understand as an aspiring racing driver is for that car to be on the grid, someone has to pay for it. Someone has to pay for that car to be on that grid. Okay? It's usually not the teams. Okay? It's not Rinaldi Racing. It's not Kessel Racing. They are not paying. They are a business which runs the car. Same in formulas. Okay? It's only in Formula One where you see that the team itself finds a sponsor. And even in that case, someone as good as Sergio Perez, who's phenomenal in my opinion, world class, brings a ton of sponsorship to the team. Okay. As a driver, you got to ask yourself, how do we find the money to get that car on the grid? How am I going to find the money to get that car on the grid? And it doesn't matter how quick you are. If the team doesn't have the money to get the car on the grid, your speed doesn't matter. And the team will look to you for the money. Either it comes from your family, either it comes from you personally, or comes from sponsors. Now, either way, any one of those ways is fine by me as long as you get on that grid. The only thing is if you rely on your family, there's a greater cost to your character when things get tough later down the line. But I have no problem with a rich kid arriving and being fast. I've got no problem with that. If that's how you get on the grid, cool, awesome. But for those of you who don't have that option, it's time to forget about how fast you are, okay? Because that is going to be the easiest part of your life as a racing driver. You have to think of all the other things which are going to be very difficult. And the main thing is finding enough money, finding 100 to 200 to 300,000 euros to get that car moving on the grid without any damage, by the way. If you get good at that part, you have a higher chance of becoming a professional racing driver. So first, you're going to have to understand that you have talent, because that's table stakes. It's the minimum amount that you need to be on a grid. You at least need some talent. Okay? Once you've established that, I don't know, win some sim races, win some karting races, cool, we've got some speed. Okay, now become very good at finding money or making your own money. Become a very good entrepreneur, which anyone can do. Okay, it takes the same amount of hard work as it does with racing. Remember what I said? I said I'm going to take the dedication I had in racing, I'm going to put it into becoming, to making a company successful. And that if I just, all I had to do is redirect my dedication, my obsession in motorsports to business, and I found a way. And I think anyone is capable of doing that, because I was useless at making money. I wasn't the guy who would I didn't have a lemonade stand when I was younger. I was the opposite of that. Okay, my family is not super rich by any means, but I wanted for nothing as a kid. Okay, the only thing that the thing they wouldn't give me was racing. That was just out of the question. So I had to figure this stuff out for myself. And I've learned now that if you want to become a racing driver, you have to first become a very good entrepreneur. That is the absolute essential step to being able to define your own career. If you're going to rely on other people, your manager, your father, your uncle's friend who owns a supermarket, your career is going to get stopped in its tracks. It's not in your control. Like, the key thing that I had was, it was down to me to find a way. And with the help of Alan initially, Alan and Claudio, to get into to Europe, that helped me start to develop relationships with teams, so that when I didn't have the money, I could say, guys, please, I don't have the money right now. Please let me do this next race. And they would be like, oof, this is a huge risk, because this kid could just disappear back to Cape Town tomorrow. And then we're sitting here with a massive bill that we have to pay. But I was able to be honest and genuine enough where they could trust me enough, where they could stretch that bill where I didn't have to pay it before the race. I could pay it 2 weeks after the race. Those are the things that make the difference. And remember, that has nothing to do with my speed. Nothing.
David, I have a question.
David, just quickly, can I just also ask one quickly? Sorry there, Abdul, just jumping in there. Just one more.
Sure.
And that is also just adding to what you've all said, David. Now, being a South African as well. Now, I know sometimes us as South Africans, we can have a little bit of a complex about maybe a bit of inferiority. I don't speak for all of us. But also as well, we're very far away from everything. The racing scene is up in Europe, up in Great Britain. And you go there, and also there's language barriers. There's all kinds of things as well. How much of a mental hurdle is that to get over, from that point of view?
So, okay, here's where my ego comes out. I'm sorry, but I always felt that if I did anything properly, I could be world class. And I learned that from my sim racing days, because when I was playing Gran Turismo, or when I was playing any video game, I could get in the top 10 of the world leaderboard. So I had this mentality where I could always compare myself to the best in the world. And I always believed, like, if I could just win this flippin' South African karting championship and qualify for the world championship, because that's what you had to do, I know I can take it to the best in the world. I know I can. And that was what happened. So when I arrived on a bigger scene and I was competing against the world's best drivers, that to me was not the most intimidating thing. The biggest issue I had to get over was I'd spent 7 years reading motorsport news, autosport, and now suddenly I was standing next to these drivers, and I had to get over that. Like, okay, David, he's not a superstar, he's your competitor. Okay, cool. That took a while to get over. The biggest issue was I've always raced with Italian teams. Okay, Rinaldi is German, but Italian owner. And when you're spending as much time as I have overseas, especially in Italy, and you go for dinner, you go to the racetrack, you go for lunch, everyone's talking Italian. So, and I'm terrible at language. It's not because I didn't try to learn Italian. I can understand a little bit now, but not enough. And those are the tough parts. And I know that Calvin van der Linde has had similar issues where you are around people, but they're not your people. It's very lonely. It's you don't share anything with them outside of how's your day, So that's the tough part. The competing part, again, is the easiest part. Up to a certain point. I mean, you don't just go out and bang pole positions everywhere, and when you don't, your team gets upset. But that you work on with your talent, that's okay. But it's the other things around that which are very difficult to get around.
David, there's a question that came in from Paul van Green, and he says, Perez has money and talent, so why is he without a drive for 2021? I'm not sure if you, well, if you have an answer for that, but maybe you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, sure. It's not a this is one of the travesties where it's clear that this driver does deserve to be an F1, but we're also looking at a generation of Formula One drivers which are probably at the highest level we've seen, I don't know, for ever probably. I mean, in terms of the depth of talent that we have on the grid, where the worst driver there is still going to destroy any other driver in any other series. Perez has just caught himself in a place where everyone knows, they know his level. They know he's not necessarily a race winner. He's a very solid driver. But they're not trying to find that at the moment. They're trying to find the next Verstappen, the next Norris, the next Leclerc. And I love Perez. I love his tenacity. I love all of those. I love every element of his driving. His ability is world class. But he's fighting in an area, if he's in the top 0.001%, these guys are on the top 0.001%, you know, or 0.001%. So it's just that's the nature of Formula One, and the level's just gotten so high now. I truly believe that we are looking at the biggest depth of talent in F1 ever.
So I think the question out there is, you see it on social media all the time, between Schumacher and Hamilton. There's a contentious issue on who the best driver is, and I know it's not
no question. There's no question. It's Hamilton. It's Hamilton.
Yeah. So everybody is kind of like, you know, they have their own views. Yeah. And so maybe just shed some light on that matter for us. Yes, let us hear what are your views.
Sure. Okay. So the reason why I think at the end Hamilton comes out on top is because Hamilton is probably one of the cleanest drivers that's been in Formula One. If you compare him to Schumacher, which, by the way, I love the ruthless nature of an athlete. To me, maybe incorrectly, but I look up to people like Schumacher, Lance Armstrong, Tiger Woods, Valentino Rossi, because they would go to any length to beat you, any length. But at the same time, even Senna, he also, you know, his fight with Prost and stuff, there's a whole bunch of checklists you could go through. I think that Hamilton got to Schumacher's level without being a dirty driver. Aggressive, yes, but not dirty. Now, most people the reason why this is such a big debate is because they look at his results, and that's what the argument is pinned on, is his results. And they say, but if you look at his car dominance, you could say that he wouldn't achieve even half those things in a Ferrari. And I go, yeah, fine. But what do you know about driving? What do you actually know about driving? And if you know as much as a real racing driver does at a high level, how can you not see his ability? How can you not see the fact that when it comes down to a pole position lap, by the way, the car doesn't steer itself. Bottas has proven that it doesn't steer itself. Okay? He never misses an apex. He invents new lines. Okay? You'll often see at hairpins, he doesn't hit the apex. For about a year, commentators were saying that it was a mistake until they realized it's not a mistake. He's looked at other forms of motorsport and incorporated it into the way that he goes racing. It was like when Rossi started to stick his leg out in MotoGP, everyone thought he was falling off the bike a couple of times, and then they clicked. They're like, oh, hang on, he's balancing the bike in the way that he brings the weight in, is able to tip it further down earlier, get better rotation. Okay? And now everyone puts their leg out on a MotoGP bike. Now everyone in Formula cars rolls more speed through a hairpin because they take a wider line. Hamilton invented that. That's a genius at work. He's doing things that other drivers try to copy. Now, every time I speak to a real racing driver, okay, we all have the same opinion. Hamilton, incredible. Every time I speak to a non-racing driver, a fan, a spectator, it's all about the car. And that's because all they can see is a driver turning a steering wheel.
Yeah.
But they don't understand how he is extracting that speed. And of course, the reason why Bottas looks so bad now is because he's under so much pressure to perform that he can't. No driver performs under that kind of pressure. None of them. None of them. 3 drivers in F1 who are excelling at the moment is Hamilton, Verstappen, and Ricciardo. All 3 have no pressure. They've crushed their teammates. They are secure for the future. So in the case of Ricciardo, he's going to a good team at McLaren, which is on the uptrend. Hamilton has proven everything he needs to prove. And Verstappen is considered amongst everyone as untouchable. So he's like, well, he holds the power in his team negotiations. He has no pressure. If he crashes the car, it's not his fault. Now, those are the 3 guys who crush everyone else because they've put themselves in a position to relieve pressure. And when you drive freely, you tend to be faster.
Absolutely.
So it's what we saw in the sorry, David. It's what we saw in the 70th anniversary Grand Prix earlier this year with Max Verstappen. He just went past that next level to try and beat Hamilton, and it was actually one of the few times where the Mercedes were beaten this year. But going back as well to Lewis Hamilton, I know what Martin Brundle was actually saying is he said even as well that Lewis Hamilton is not even last of the late breakers.
No, he's just flowing.
He's flowing. And going by what you said about Rossi as well, about that whole, and also watching other forms of motorsport. I remember years ago when I started commentating, I was commentating and watching motard racing, and that's where I actually first saw the guys stick their foot out. And then one day watching MotoGP, I saw it, and I thought I was so smart and everything like that. I thought, oh, that's a motard way of riding, until you go through what Rossi had been doing.
He owns a motard track.
He was doing flat track motocross, and there we go. For that moment, I felt like a genius. But
Hamilton beat you to it, my friend. I mean, Rossi beat you.
They all beat me to it. Yeah, everybody beats me to it. But that's I think what you're trying to say over there. So it's amazing. It's not about just. Remember as well. There's a series on Netflix. Sorry, I'm speaking a bit long here. Of One Man Fangio, who I think, I've had a lot of thought about this, as the greatest driver of all time across all eras. But he even had a section where he said he would talk to the mechanic and he would ask the mechanic, how high can I rev this particular racing car? And they would give him a point and he wouldn't go over that.
Yeah.
So it's all about that sensitivity. It's all about that putting the pieces together. It's not always about being last to the late breakers. It's not always about being the most sideways or whatever. Prost was also a guy who was very smooth.
Yeah, no, there's Hamilton's style of driving. To me, is just beautiful to watch. And I do a lot of coaching, not just in real world, but also on the simulator. I've started. Well, my biggest passion in motorsport is the art, like the skill of driving, and what does it mean? Like, why is someone faster than someone else? Like, how are they able to get a GT car to go quicker? Like, if you break down the phases of braking, downshifting, turning, getting on the power, at what point do you do all of those things? Your sense of timing, and your timing changes per car that you're in. And then you watch Hamilton, you're like, he hits every apex. It means his timing is impeccable. It's impeccable. He dominates wet races. I think in 9 wet qualifyings, he's been on pole 8 times. Crushed the competition on that.
To quote another genius, Bruce Lee, be water, my friend.
Yeah, Bruce Lee. Yeah, it's one of my favorite quotes. So,
David,
water into a cup, it becomes the cup.
Yeah, David, is another question here from Paul van Grienen.
Yes.
What are your views on George Russell in the Mercedes this weekend? So
interesting situation. He arrives with no pressure, in the sense that he's not expected to achieve much, but there's going to be a lot of personal pressure on himself, in that he's managed to drag this Williams, which everyone considers a dog, to high levels, and now he's going to get in the best car in the world with his talent. And I do have a controversial opinion about George Russell. We'll get to that in a second. He's going to want to prove himself. Let's see. I think that Russell will become a world champion before Max Verstappen because he's going to be in a Mercedes. So let's see. I have an opinion on Max. I think he's a phenomenal driver. Absolutely. But he hasn't gotten... He's also susceptible to expectations and nerves, like any young person is. And Turkey was a prime example. He dominated every single session, and then when it counted, he fell apart. And I don't mean it. I mean, I am not on Max's level, okay?
Yeah. Very much. You know, we had Bottas, sorry that you're jumping in. We had Bottas, how many sessions he was leading in some Grand Prix. And then when it comes to the Banzai lap, it's Lewis Hamilton.
Can't do it. Yeah, I mean, Hamilton's, 98 poles or something is it's not a coincidence. It's, okay, look. There's no question that he has a car advantage. But I'm not just looking at that. I'm looking at how the guy drives, how he's able to do purple sectors when it counts. And I can't do that thing. And I can see a lot of other F1 drivers who also can't do that thing. I look at my vulnerabilities and I see them in other drivers. And Hamilton's not invincible. Rosberg eventually took him 33 years, but eventually he broke Hamilton. They grew up together, they raced together. Rosberg knows Hamilton better than Hamilton knows Hamilton. And he was the only one who eventually got in there. But for the most part, you just have to look at the records of these drivers. It's not just about the car, because they've won in everything they competed in. That's a very good indicator of their level as a driver. Schumacher also won in everything he competed in. Senna as well, Max Verstappen, Leclerc. These guys are at an incredibly high level. Incredibly high level.
David, take us into the modern era of motorsport quickly. Sim racing is the buzzword around now.
Yeah.
You just mentioned running a car on track is super expensive.
Yeah.
How valuable has sim racing become? The reason why I'm making that statement is people can actually go and challenge you. Because you run your own car, you've got your own car in a video game.
Yeah. So when I lived in Cape Town, just 1 second. Mike Nathan says, would you agree that Merck will not give Russell a quicker car than Bottas? No, they will. They'll give him the equal car. Toto Wolff is a genius. They have no reason to sabotage their own team. So they'll give them both the best opportunity. They're spending $400 million a year. Yeah. So, hey. There's no reason to sabotage a car or make Bottas make Russell race for Bottas. It's not necessary. Going back to sim racing, when I lived in Cape Town, I lived in Hout Bay. The track was in Tableview. An hour's plus drive. My parents didn't want to take me. So I got very little practice. A very, very, very little practice my whole karting career. So I would use Gran Turismo as my method of training. First of all, I was only driving around one racetrack. That's a big bummer in Cape Town. That's one of the things I'd love to fix one day, is to build, if I could one day afford it, is to build a second racetrack in Cape Town. That would be so cool for our community, you know? And I was like, okay, well, I need to learn other racetracks. And then I started to learn that you can learn how to learn other racetracks. And that to me was a massive breakthrough. It's like, what is the simulator for? Because the track itself back then was not a good simulation of a real racetrack. It looked like it, but it wasn't it. But it still had a racing line, it still had a braking point, it still had a point of acceleration. So only until recently, I was laughed at for using my computer and my PlayStation as a way to train to be a better racing driver. And then COVID came, and all of a sudden these journalists had nothing to do, the real racing drivers had nothing to do, so they started to cover my world, which is sim racing, and they discovered this incredible level of competition. a much deeper pool of talent because the barrier to entry is much lower. And you basically, now suddenly sim racing, of course you're going to be sim racing. What else? Well, why wouldn't you? Okay, so sim racing to me, it's not just about learning a racetrack. I personally use sim racing to understand myself. I'm able to simulate the pressures that I feel in real life in a game, when I'm playing a game, and then understand what part of my body gets tense when I'm under pressure. And how can I become more aware of myself so that when I go racing in real life, I can perform in a more relaxed way because I can identify ahead of time why I'm nervous or what's being tensed up. My shoulders, my hands, my ankles. So from a professional driver's point of view, incredibly valuable for understanding yourself. From a fan's point of view, amazing. You get to race against Calvin van der Linde, myself, some Formula One drivers, because you can all join the same race and race against that person. Now, is the racing itself real? No. When you touch, the car just bounces or gets some fake damage and you can press restart, fine. But I'm still racing against Charles Leclerc, who's inputting the feedback into the car, which makes it move in its way. So I've had the privilege of racing against Valentino Rossi, Charles Leclerc, Jenson Button. I've even coached these guys, Jean-Eric Verne. And I've gotten to learn how they drive. I've gotten to hear how they speak because we're on calls like this while we're driving. So sim racing has opened up a new opportunity for motorsport, where motorsport doesn't have to die, but we can use sim racing as a tool to make motorsport better. And that's really, really, really cool. Like all of when I'm away from the racetrack these days, I have an academy called the Coach Dave Academy, where I help sim racers become better drivers. And I've created a sim racing platform called the Sim Grid, where you can race against myself, you can race against other drivers as well, and compete against each other in championships, in one-off events, and so on. So you're talking to the number one proponent of sim racing. I am a massive believer in it, and I invest every dollar that I make as a racing driver, I reinvest into sim racing, into either business or other people. So I'm hugely passionate about it. Huge.
That's interesting. Interesting, David. I'm gonna I see we have Anthony Reid with us here. Patrick, I'm gonna give you the honor of introducing our next guest. David, stay on the show with us.
I'm not leaving.
Because I want to chat to you. I want to ask you a couple of more questions. But Patrick, you want to introduce us to some? Well, on Saturday at Killarney, we have an enduro race, and there will be some brilliant group of international drivers and as well as some local drivers. And you're going to introduce us to the 9-hour enduro, Patrick, and also to one of the more famous international drivers that I remember from British touring cars. And I remember correctly, if I remember correctly, he drove the Nissan Primera with Nick Cavalli, shared a car in the 90s. When they won I can't remember exactly what it was. I was very young then. But I'll hand it over to you, Patrick, to introduce our following guest quickly.
I would like to say that I was also very young when Anthony Reid last raced at Killarney in 1996, driving the Nissan Primera. But if I may, before I actually speak to you, Anthony, I just want to make a comparison between David in the modern era, you in the older era. You didn't have computer games in your days. You developed new lines of racing by bouncing off your teammates and opposition.
Yeah, I mean, it was very different when I started racing in the 1970s. There was no such thing as data logging. If you had a teammate, you had to trust that what he was telling you that he was doing in a particular corner was in fact the truth, or perhaps he was trying to murder you. I fortunately lived through the huge technological changes that have taken place over the last several decades, and it's just astonishing what you can do. Using software, data logging, and also sim racing. It's become big business. I mean, my brother builds simulators for iZone, which is a virtual racing school or training center based in Silverstone.
Yeah.
And I've done some of the work to make the cars realistic as possible. And then I was asked to race at Speedway. I mean, just as the events businesses in South Africa have been hugely affected by COVID, the same is true also, well, not just globally, but back in the UK. So normally I'd be actively involved in the 3 big motorsport events at Goodwood. All of those events were cancelled. But what they did do was they ran a behind the closed doors event at Goodwood in October called Speedway. And it was actually a really interesting event, and a lot of big names came to participate. But what happened was a few weeks before, Goodwood commissioned a company to distribute simulators around Europe and Britain and also to the States. And we all joined up using all these different platforms. And so drivers like Andy Reid, who, he was in Italy. Rob Huff was in Spain, myself, Darren Turner, and a number of other drivers besides. We all ended up racing against each other around Goodwood. It was quite extraordinary, yet and it worked very well. And they used that content to intersperse between racing, for purposes of television and the online platforms. So, teaching an old dog new tricks. Well, it's what I did was that one of my a significant number of race engineers turned their attention to sim racing because they couldn't go real racing, and they were working with people like Alonso and people like that. Anyway, for this event, I got one of these engineers to turn up at my house, and Ford was there when we had a bit of a glitch, and he was able to fix plug his laptop in and recalibrate it, and I ended up being quickest in the shootout. But when they heard that I had a race engine in my kitchen working on the simulator, the other drivers, people like Andy Reid, said, "For God's sakes, Reid's got a race engineer in his kitchen." They couldn't believe it.
I do the same. I do exactly the same thing. I've used my strategists from real life and my engineers to help engineer my car for big sim events. To me, it makes total sense. I had a new engineer in real life this year, so we used sim racing as a way to understand our communication and the language that we spoke, the kind of feedback that I would give, and how we did respond. But that's where simulators are really strong.
Phenomenal.
And in the kitchen as well, they can fry you an egg. Well, it's quite a nice thing as well.
Yeah, so because my wife was at times during the day, she would come through and sort of make a cup of tea and then start doing some dishwashing. Probably because she wasn't the centre of attention. She was making a bit of a fuss in the background, which I found it ended up being just a great experience, actually. I enjoyed it.
Anthony, we would like to. We must welcome you to South Africa. It's been a long time. I trust you've been to South Africa in between, but the last time we saw you racing here was in 1996 at the Kalani International Touring Car Race. Please put our listeners in the picture. You're back. You're not just here as a visitor or as a steward or as an official. You are actually back in the racing seat again.
Well, yeah, it's quite incredible. It's been 24 years since I've been returned to South Africa. I'm here in this amazing house in, I think it's Pringle Bay. That spectacular drive down through a mountain, a sort of cliff road pass overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. And it's all because of Greg Mills has invited me over for this particular race, and I've got to thank him very much for a fabulous opportunity. It's amazing. Really looking forward to it. And there's some other big names in the team like Jan Lammers. And I think Mike Briggs was due to be my teammate. And of course, he was my teammate in period back in 95. But he's been called away. He had to go to Australia for some reason, family business. So it's amazing. And the country is spectacular. It's a beautiful country. And so I'm looking forward to the whole experience this weekend, and some great racing and some great drivers. Because when I raced in period, Dion Joubert, Janil de Villiers, he's gone on to do great things in Paris-Dakar. So I'm hoping to catch up with some old friends, to be honest, and just have a great weekend.
I trust you've been briefed that you're not allowed to lean on anybody during this event.
Yeah, I'm going to have to recalibrate from the days of touring cars where we used to sort of trade paint and take each other's wing mirrors off.
Full send.
But I've been out of touring cars for some time, so because these days I tend to race a lot of classic cars which are priceless. Some of them, Ferraris and Cobras and what have you. So I'll have my sensible head on this weekend.
Can you put the two eras into perspective for us quickly, please? David has explained to us the technicalities of modern motorsport. But in your days, was it really as physical as it sounded now?
Oh, the question's addressed to me. Yes, sorry, slightly distracted there. But there are far more driver rates on racing cars these days. Power steering, ABS, traction control, air conditioning. In the GT cars, certainly if you race at Le Mans, it's compulsory. In my day, that would have been considered an absolute luxury. I mean, when you raced, say, at Le Mans in a Porsche 962 doing 220 miles an hour in the Mulsanne Straight, in the baking hot summer weather that you frequently get at La Sarthe in June, it really took it out of you. Sometimes we had to wear sort of space NASA type cool suits, which ran through a refrigerated box. But the problem was when the ice all melted, it sort of actually ended up boiling you from, very low power steering and low power braking or anything like that. You certainly have to be bloody fit and do a lot of training. I think it's a little easier these days if you're in the right car. So
I did have a moment in Suzuka where the AC failed, and it got so hot in the car that our shoes were melting. And I just...
Wow. So which category was that, David?
It was in GT. The AC it was overpressurized. Now, so in GT, as you said, there's rules that you have to run the AC, which is for the most part is good. But when you race in like a cold temperature, it actually gets freezing inside the car, and you can't turn the AC off sometimes. But in Japan, it was nothing like that. It was 60, 70 degrees inside the car, and our shoes were sticking to the pedals when we were moving our foot off them.
Oh my
and
word.
it was horrific. It was, So I sympathize with you guys racing back then. I drove a 962 Porsche, which recently, just as a shakedown for a customer. I can't believe you guys raced those things. It's insane.
Well,
David?
They were extremely quick.
Yes, extremely quick. So much power.
David, just a quick question. Somebody asked, can you recommend a good rig for under 100K? I assume this is a simulator.
Yeah. To be honest, from South Africa, it's difficult for me to recommend because I don't know what you guys have supplies of. But if they were based in Europe, it'd be quite easy to put something together for about 50,000 Rand. You could get a Thrustmaster, base and wheels, pedals, and then a playseat chassis to put it all on, and then you just find the cheapest TV that you can. Or if you can go middle range. The cheapest way to get involved in sim racing is actually by owning a PlayStation and playing Gran Turismo, which was what I did for a very, very long time. I only got into PC simulators middle of last year. So the Gran Turismo PlayStation route is totally fine as well.
Okay, then I have a question. It's from Paul for both Anthony and David. What do you think the difference is, a different skill set between track racers and rally drivers? Maybe Anthony, enlighten us a bit on that question.
Yeah, I've only done one rally, and it is a very different skill set. They had this event called the Lombard RAC Rally, and the last year that I raced for MG Sport and Racing, they entered 5 factory cars into this event. The Kielder Forest, Eppens, Black Beachfront, I think, and circuit, and had a code coming through, but you were so focused as you would be in a race car. I didn't, on occasions, heed what he was saying to me, and didn't. I nearly killed a photographer that was standing on the wrong. Well, he was standing at the apex on the outside of a very tight, flying over this blind crest, 200 meters. And ditch, and all I was in front of my car as he dived out the way. Yeah, so skill set, and you know, I literally work on that for years to pick up the sort of skill set.
Yeah,
David.
For me, a perfectionist. You know what's coming up next. World Rally Championships, they do 1 week recce's. They earn these rally stages.
Well, it's open to discussion.
Rallying is going sideways. But Ogier, Loeb brought this in where he started to smoothen out the lines and everything. And Ogier sort of took that over. They go in with much less pitch in the car, overslow the car at the apex and get on the power sooner, which is not entirely, but it's part of it.
Patrick, maybe just 9 hour, couple we close up the show tonight.
Well, I'd love Anthony for the event, but this is the South African Endurance Series. It's round 6 to Kalani. That's the next for Malammers. Sarel and Jan had a phenomenal outing, as far as I'm concerned.
Impressive, because I mean, for the Le Mans cars for this weekend, with a real mix of interesting drivers and experience.
At your audience you have now, you need...
I've never driven a Ginetta GT3 before, but I made a few phone calls before and all sorts of feedback from the team. The cars are well set up. Into a car that has a whole load of issues, you can't find your rhythm before the race starts, and you know, problems tend to compound themselves. So these cars are Ginetta's got a great name. They make great, but you know, fingers crossed, we should be able to jump in tomorrow. We're going to do a bit of free practice, a shakedown. Everything should be working well. And then sessions to find your rhythm around the circuits. I remember the circuit. I don't think it's changed much in 24 years. And I've been doing a bit of YouTube stuff in car just to refresh my memory of which way the track goes. Hopefully, you know, with the ingredients we've got, the skill set of the team, engineering good and data, we can get into the groove very quickly. And have a great fun race. That's the plan. Good
luck.
Okay, Byron, you've been quiet there for a while. Anything you want to add before I just ask the final questions to both Anthony and David?
I would hate myself if I didn't ask this of Anthony at least. And if my memory and we were talking about various types of racing cars over the years that you've driven, but you've driven some interesting vehicles as well, catering trucks and like that, and as well as limousines, and I think a motorhome in there as well on a little small show named Top Gear. Yep. Many years ago. Now, your experiences in these very, very racy vehicles, I would like to know a lot about it.
Yeah, I was fortunate to do 5 or 6 film shoots when Top Gear was at its absolute pinnacle with Jeremy Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May. I mean, the show was big, you know, numbers compared to even how it is today. And but they had this sort of tagline where they wanted to compare vehicles. You know, Boris Johnson wanted to choose the most suitable bus. So it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing. So, for example, it was bus racing to find out which was the best bus to replace the old London, Route Master double-decker bus. And it was always a bit of lottery. You weren't quite sure which vehicle you were going to get until you got to the circuit on the day. But I happened to get this very quick bus. It was a single-decker. And so I was able to lap the entire field. But all sorts of, basically, you had a storyboard. What do they call it? Basically, a storyboard. There was a certain set pieces that had to be done throughout the day. But the soft 5 minutes to get the job done, I told Tom Chilton, who's another really good touring car driver, who was driving the bus, you go ahead of me, I'll catch you up. And there was a sort of fairly tightish corner with a ramp to stage the bus going over. And he'd not managed to successfully roll it all day. And then at the moment he mounted the ramp, I caught him up and hit him really hard up the backside. The bus then rolled over. I passed underneath the greasy side with a single-decker bus and came out the other side having saved the day. Stig wrote in his autobiography, The Man in the White Suit, he dedicated a chapter to how crazy I was and how I managed to roll a double-decker bus. So one of my motorsport moments.
And now he's racing Kilani 9-hour. Kilani 9-hour. So everybody,
Kilani 9-hour, yeah.
Kilani.
Yeah. There's so many different aspects to being involved in the motor industry. I'm the British land speed record holder, for example. It doesn't mean to say I've done 400 miles an hour in a mile. There's nowhere really in Britain you can do that. But there's a whole lot of other anorak records all the way up to 24 hours, which hadn't been broken for 16 years. So ProDrive entered me and a team of journalists and racing drivers in 2 Volvo S60s at Millbrook. Millbrook, where there's a 2.3 mile circumference track, which is heavily banked. And so we went out and broke all the records, all the way through to 24 hours, but not including the 1 mile record. And it's just another crazy thing that I've done in my 45 years of racing cars, or being involved in the business.
Yeah, Anthony, what an amazing journey in your racing career as well. As we were listening to David earlier on. David, just one last question. You mentioned earlier that you'd love to come back to Cape Town and build another racetrack.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know what is currently in South Africa, I'm not too sure in the UK, but definitely South Africa, motorsport is not at its peak. It's actually at a very low at the moment. Obviously, with the 9-hour coming up on Saturday, it's going to kind of lift the spirits of Cape Town and hopefully South Africa motor racing. What do you think is the way forward for motorsport in South Africa, especially where it is at the moment? And maybe that, Anthony, while David's answering that question, I'm not too sure in the UK what happens in the UK, but maybe from your experience as well, what do you guys think we need to do to get motorsport back to where it was, 10, 15 years ago, maybe? David?
I started racing when I was 15 years old. I started racing 20 years ago, and already back then people were saying that racing needed to go back to what it was 15 years before that.
Okay.
Definitely do remember that there were a lot of competitors in karting at the time, and I know that there's much less now. I think the biggest issue in South Africa is a question of money. It's our exchange rate and the fact that racing is not getting cheaper in Europe. Here, a season of professional karting in the European Championship is 250,000 euros, which is the same amount of money you'd spend in a GT Championship. So I don't know how you justify doing karting when it's costing that much, and you could never dream of doing that in South Africa. That would pay for 10 years of karting for most people on a regional level. I think about this a lot because obviously at some point I want to move back to South Africa and I want to make an impact on motorsports in my home country. I want more people to do what myself, Calvin, Jordan, Jonathan Aberdeen, I want more people to do what we've done. But it's not easy for anyone. It's just because we see a lot of British drivers and Italian drivers and French drivers becoming professionals. Doesn't mean it was easy for them. They're actually competing against a much bigger pool than we are. They obviously just have one advantage. They don't have to travel 10 or 12, 15 hours on a flight to get to where the hub is, but it's not easy. We see the same challenges here. It's just not as clear. Most people do struggle financially to take part in motorsports in these countries. And I have a lot of friends who are drivers now who had a period where they couldn't race, like me. Maybe not 7 years, but maybe 1 or 2 years because they couldn't find any money to do it. In our country, many people have said, you know, why doesn't the government help out more and so on? And I feel like it's not the government's responsibility. At the end of the day, if you really look at what motorsport is, it's this huge piece of land for a bunch of dudes to go around in circles and have fun. Now, especially now in modern motorsport, the relevance of what we are doing is becoming less impactful on what a road car is. There used to be a good justification for why you invest millions of pounds or euros or rands into teams on a racetrack because you could take that technology into the cars. But now we're going electric or hybrid, and that is even more expensive. So I still don't have the answer of what will revive racing in South Africa. What I do see is that, and please forgive me for going this direction, but it's not the solution, but I am seeing that there's still a passion for racing. It's just not the form that we recognize it. There's more sim races in South Africa than there are real races. They enjoy Formula One as much as you and I. They just don't have a connection to what the kind of racing that we would recognize. You know, the old school loud V8 stuff isn't as cool to them as what they experience in a sim and what they see in Formula One and so on. Whatever the solution is in South Africa, it will be the same solution that we need for Europe as well, because lots of races don't have spectators. Lots of grids are shrinking. Just this week, Audi pulled out of Formula E, Volkswagen pulled out of motorsport, and BMW just pulled out of Formula E 10 minutes before our podcast started. Yeah. So we're going through a massive change. And I think fundamentally it's because there's less relevance of what happens on a racetrack to what is sold to the consumer. And that's a much bigger problem. What we need to do in South Africa is keep enjoying ourselves, enjoying our racing, make it less political. South African motorsport is still the most political form of motorsport I've ever competed in compared to overseas. It's much clearer overseas because their rules are black and white. And in South Africa, it's never been black and white. It's always a little bit of gray. Even the GT3 series, when I saw GT3s coming to South Africa, I was really happy until I found out that everyone was uncorking their engines and tuning them up to 600 horsepower. And I thought to myself, well, it's just going to die like the rest of them because we don't have black and white rules and a framework to work off. Whereas here, if you uncorked your engine, you're not racing. Simple as that. So maybe there's something in between all that. But motorsport itself is going to go through a tough period in the next couple of years. And
David,
I don't think, yeah.
You said something interesting. You said there's no relevance or no connection between what we race anymore and what people drive on the road. So maybe that's a good indication of which way we should be going. Maybe trying to get, the old Group N, like we used to have in South Africa, the old Group N cars.
Yeah.
Maybe going back to that type of formula, keeping it as cheap as possible, getting more manufacturers involved again, because that'll also be to their advantage.
I don't think so anymore, because manufacturers don't sell cars because of racing any longer. They sell cars because of Instagram. They sell cars because of cool car shows. They sell cars because of YouTube videos of things going upside down and not coming back on their four wheels. Nürburgring lap records don't matter anymore. That kind of magical press release doesn't get the coverage it used to. what I'm trying to say is that there's a fundamental disconnect about what we understand motorsport is versus what where the auto industry is moving and what the consumer understands a car should be doing. And we need to try and unlock what's going to happen there. I think we're going to go through a dip, but I think, for example, when for example, in the UK in 2030, there's no longer going to be any sale of gas-powered cars, petrol-powered cars. Self-driving cars are becoming more and more common as a concept, which is going to take hold, whether we like it or not. When that happens, more and more people are going to flock to racetracks where they can drive again. But that's not in the next 5 years. The next 5 years.
The politicians always get it wrong. I mean, there was a big push for diesel a few years ago. So
that went well.
And then you get Dieselgate and all the rest of it.
Yes.
If I got anything,
same with batteries.
We're not going to be driving electric. We'll still be buying petrol cars in 10 years' time in Britain. But who knows? I mean, but I tell you what, I mean, British touring cars was hugely successful in the 90s with lots of different manufacturers. They always said that there were more professional drivers in the British Touring Car Championship in the 90s than there were perhaps in Formula One.
Yes.
Because there was about 18 drivers being paid, which is not the case in Formula One. It became too expensive, manufacturers pulled out, the major manufacturers consolidated with other manufacturers, Nissan and Renault, Ford with Volvo and Mazda. And it just became too expensive. But they readapted and they introduced NGTC with common components, engines, gearboxes, suspension components. And the popularity of British touring cars has returned to the levels that they enjoyed, in the 90s in terms of spectators at the circuit. But the other problem is there's so many different platforms for watching motorsport. Yes. When I was racing British touring cars, there was BBC One, ITV, and BBC Two, and we were on BBC One Grandstand Live, with Murray Walker and people. But British touring cars is adapting. They're going to introduce the hybrid formula in 2022. Mm-hmm. Big fields of cars sell. The grids are full this year. The racing's good, and the crowds love it. This weekend, what's happening at Kyalami? A sellout grid of cars. COVID has screwed things up because there won't be any spectators. Otherwise, I'm sure there would be 25,000 people there. I believe it's being streamed online or television. Greg has invited the president of this region to the circuit to watch the racing on Saturday. Got some international drivers over here. There's a great thirst to get back on circuit and go racing. And you've got to be adaptable and find, what works best for the most people. There's no reason why South African motor racing can't be successful, very successful, going on into the future. I mean, the exchange rate doesn't help. I mean, I think I can get a beer for less than £1 in a whatever a restaurant.
It's good though, right?
It's good from my point of view. 20 rand to the pound. But when I was last year, I think it was 10 rand.
Yeah, it's double.
Yeah. But that doesn't help. But motor racing always ebbs and flows, but it adapts. And there's a hunger to watch motor racing out there. We've just got to find a way of making it successful.
Absolutely.
Just quickly,
just in closing, Patrick. Sorry, I'll come to you now, Baden. Patrick, just in closing.
I would like to ask Anthony the question that David raised now, the bending of rules, the grey areas. Would you be in agreement with that, Anthony? That's a mistake. If you've got a set of rules, don't fool with them during the season. Don't change anything. If it's successful, stick to it. And your formula will be more successful. Isn't that what basically kept the British Touring Car Series going? The only difference in the rules, they were occasionally the drivers got into each other.
Yeah, in Formula One and British Touring Cars and FIA GT3, it's heavily policed and scrutineered. you have to have a certain, a series has got to reach critical mass where they can have a good team of scrutineers that police the series to make sure that nobody's blatantly cheating.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it pisses off the competitors that are not cheating, and it kills the series. So, strong policing of a particular series is a key part of that particular series' success.
Completely agree. That's, I think, why
Absolutely.
there's so many successful series in Europe, is this consistency
But-
where you can work towards something over more than 1 year. Whereas in South Africa, well, if you look at karting in South Africa, it was a good example where there was a period where we just had the Rotax series, and that was one of the most strongest eras of karting in our country. Consistent rules, heavily policed by Ed Murray and his crew, and it was good for our sport. And then entered the Rock series, and dynamics started to come into play, and there was a lot more flexibility there. And people loved that flexibility, but it brought costs out of control, and it affected us in a negative way. So fundamentally, I would love to see a bit more stringency in our application of rules, because the GT3 formula works overseas. It works everywhere else, and it's clear to me that in South Africa there are people with the budget to race, to have a big enough grid of GT cars. But why? I'm curious. Why did we decide that it was okay to modify the engines and change the brake systems and do things which the whole point of the reason why GTs are successful overseas is their balance of performance. You can bring a Nissan GTR and a Ferrari and an Audi, and they compete on within tenths of a second overseas. But in South Africa, we had this great idea to modify the engines. I just don't know why that happened.
Because it only suits certain people. That's probably the reason
it's
why.
short-termism. It's short-termism.
Yeah. Biden, in
Generally-
closing, anyone you want to just add?
Yeah, that's a point, and I've always, we talk about the European series, the various European countries series we talked about down here. One I've always liked as well, and I'd like to hear a lot from Anthony because he was very much involved in that scene, was the Japanese scene back in the early 90s, and it looks like, because Anthony was an all-Japanese Formula 3 champion, beating the likes of Jacques Villeneuve and Tom Kristensen. But it looks like over with Super Formula and also a lot of the touring car racing there as well, it looks healthy still to this day.
The thing is,
very highly rated.
the racing, the motorsport has always been very strong in Japan. It's a great place to race, but they're now tending to promote the Japanese drivers much more strongly these days. But I mean, you've got people like Jenson Button and Richard Lyons still racing over there. Jenson Button obviously went there with Honda after Formula One, but when I was there in the early 90s, I mean, it was quite incredible. Japanese Group C would have drivers like Jürgen Bach, Derek Bell, Jackie Ickx, Alan Jones, all these people that were racing, and I was very lucky to race with Derek. We shared a car at Fuji and Suzuka. Then I began to race there full time in Formula 3 and then touring cars, Japanese GT, Japanese Group A. We didn't know it at the time, but the sort of caliber of drivers, European and American drivers that we had, were people like Frentzen, Michael and Ralf Schumacher, the Schumacher brothers, Eddie Irvine, Johnny Herbert. The list goes on and on. Roland Ratzenberger. We didn't know it then, but looking back, a lot of those drivers went on. Mika Sala, raced for Ferrari at Monza when Schumacher broke his leg. It was an incredible time, and the Japanese really hadn't worked out that, of course, most people these days pay to race cars. So we were all being paid very handsomely to drive in the different formulas. One year I had 4 contracts running at the same time for different teams.
Their racing culture is phenomenal.
And Eddie Irvine, I knew well, he complained to me when he signed a contract to race in Formula One that he'd had to take a pay cut, from racing in Japan to go and race Formula One. Because ultimately he did very well with Ferrari, but financially that is. And I love the Japanese culture. They have a real respect to the racing drivers, for the racing drivers, which you don't really see in Europe, because there are so many quick drivers that you're very much dispensable. You know, if you screw up in a particular race, they'll push you out and get someone else. Or even if you're a really experienced driver, they'll say, well, why do we need to pay you when this guy that's just as quick as you, okay, may not be as experienced, he's going to pay us.
Budget, yeah.
It's a very different culture. It's a real culture of respect, and you know, even if you screwed up, if you gave a plausible excuse as to why you screwed up, they respect that. Whereas you get instantly fired in Europe for the same thing. But I really enjoyed my time in Japan. It was awesome. You know, Jacques Villeneuve, all these drivers that we raced together and actually socialized together, because you know, we were sort of a hub of European and some American drivers, all in the same boat. But you know, once you signed a contract, there was no chance of anyone else taking that, you know, stealing your drive. So great memories of racing in Japan.
The best experience I've had, without question, was the race I did in Suzuka. It was unbelievable, guys. They still have thousands of spectators. In fact, the grid walk, they had to have two of them, one at 6 in the evening and the other at midnight. And in both instances, it was 4 people deep, staring into the pit box. It's phenomenal.
The Japanese people love motorsport. You know, it's football, motorsport. They're kind of on a similar level.
But Byron, you keep in mind that they have more, like a lot of these days, in modern times at least, a lot of the racing is paid for, at least in Super GT and Super 5. You know, GT 500, Super Formula, it's paid for by the tire manufacturers, because they still have tire wars. And Bridgestone, Yokohama, and they spend. I have 2 friends who are racing Japan and here. Okay, not this year because of COVID and the travel restrictions, but prior they were traveling back and forth, and the amount of tire testing and the stories about the tire testing is just phenomenal.
Yeah, when I raced Japanese F3000, it was an open tire war. Pole position at Suzuka that year would have put you 5th on the grid for the Formula 1 race in what is now, I mean, then it was Japanese F3000, because of the tires were so sticky. I think my record was set testing 15 brand new sets of tires in a day's testing at Suzuka.
Oh.
And you can tune the car, just expect different constructions and compounds to solve the problem if it was understeering or whatever. Or you wanted to improve the traction, you change the tire, not the suspension.
Yes, it still happens that way. When the GT 500s raced in DTM, Jensen Button said immediately, he's like, yeah, we're not used to racing on one single make Hankook, you know, because we fix the setup with the tire. We don't change the setup to suit the tire. We change the tire to suit the car, and they don't do that in Germany, so we stood no chance. So it's fascinating. It's the best culture for racing, because they're all in.
Well, also as well, let me tell you one thing. Look on YouTube and find some of their coverage. Their commentators are phenomenal as well. I'll tell you that.
Japanese ones,
The Japanese, they are passionate, phenomenal commentary. Can't understand a word, but it sounds exciting.
Okay, guys. I think that's all for tonight. I wish Anthony well for Saturday and his team with a Killarney 9 hour. And David, just an unbelievable story of where you started and where you ended up and where you're going to end up. All the success in the future for both of you. And really great to have you guys on the show. Thanks for giving up your people's time. And it was a very, very interesting discussion. And well, see you guys. Well, all the best for Saturday, and David, all the best for your future. And I'll see you guys next week on episode 9 of Motor Talk with Witzenberg. And have a beautiful, wonderful evening, guys. And thanks for watching, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much.
It's an honor to be a guest. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, David.